Gentleman from California, Mr. Stark.
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to remind my colleagues that China never was willing to deal with intellectual property rights until they were faced with the threat of trade sanction. And at this point, I'm delighted to yield 8 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Pelosi, who has been a leader in fighting for open trade and for human rights and for bringing China into the world, a nation of human beings. I'm happy to yield to her 8 minutes at this time.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 8 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for being so generous in yielding. Mr. Speaker, this issue of granting most favored nation status to China is a very important one for the American people. It is about nothing less than our economic future, our national security, and our democratic principles. As you know, the conflict in the House of Representatives and our disagreement on this issue has centered around the issues of trade, proliferation, and human rights. That's why I'm so disappointed that we have so little time to debate this issue today, and I can only ask the Republican leadership of this House and all of those who are so eager to move this along on both sides of the aisle, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of the facts? Are you afraid of the New Year's, the 4th of July break, constituents who cannot afford to travel to Washington with businesses would have time to express their views to their members of Congress? Are you afraid of 100,000 young people in Golden Gate Park gathered together to support free Tibet? I wish our colleagues were here and not away to a funeral or without votes off of Capitol Hill, because the facts must be heard by them. Because today, members of Congress will be asked to set down a marker. How far does China have to go? How much more repression? How big a trade deficit and loss of jobs for the American worker? And how much more dangerous proliferation has to exist before members of this House of Representatives will say, I will not endorse the status quo? As I mentioned, it's about jobs, proliferation, and human rights. And there are those who say we shouldn't link human rights and trade and proliferation and trade. I disagree. But if we just want to take up this issue on the basis of economics alone, indeed, China should not receive most favored nation status for several reasons that I'd like to go into now. I'd like to call the attention of our colleagues to this chart on the status quo that the business community is asking each and every one of us to endorse today. Right now, we have a $34 billion trade deficit with China, the 1995 figure. It will be over $40 billion for 1996. Since the Tiananmen Square massacre, this figure has increased 1,000%, from $3.5 billion then to about $34 billion now. In terms of tariffs, I think it's interesting to note that the average U.S. MFN tariff on Chinese goods coming into the United States is 2%. Whereas the average Chinese MFN tariff on U.S. goods going into China is 35%. Is that reciprocal? On exports, China only allows certain industries into China, of U.S. Industries into China, and therefore only 2% of U.S. exports are allowed into China. On the other hand, the U.S. allows China to flood our markets with a third of their exports, and that'll probably go over 40%. And it's limitless because we have not placed any restriction. In terms of jobs, this is the biggest and cruelest hoax of all. Not only do we not have market access, not only do they have prohibitive tariffs, not only are our exports not let in very specifically, but China benefits with at least 10 million jobs from U.S.-China trade. The President, in his statement, requesting this special waiver, said that China trade supports 170,000 jobs in the United States, 170,000 jobs, whereas our imports from China support 10 million jobs at least. Please, yeah.
You're saying that 170,000 jobs are created in the United States by the China trade, but aren't there many more jobs that are lost in the United States?
Well, that's my point that I was getting to. I appreciate the gentleman for focusing on that. The fact is that U.S.-China trade is a job loser. And one of the reasons that it is because in order, well, first let me just make another point, and that is that our colleagues on the other side of this issue will say that trade with China, exports to China have increased 3 times in the last 10 years. They have. But they fail to mention that imports from China have increased 11 times, thereby leading to this huge trade deficit. The gentleman has control of his time, and I really have a limited time.
Just
if I have
one
time
brief
at the
question
end,
about your chart.
I will at the end of my remarks, I promise, Mr. Chairman. And the reason it's a job loser are for several other reasons. There is an important issue that we're all familiar with, and the piracy of our intellectual property. It remains to be seen if China will honor the commitment it has made in the recent agreement. It hasn't honored the memorandums of understanding or last year's agreement. And indeed, there's a report in the press yesterday that one of the PLA, People's Liberation Army factories has resumed production. But anyway, the other issue, in addition, if intellectual property is a $2 billion, $3 billion loss, technology transfer is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. If you want to sell to China, your products into China, the Chinese insist that you open a factory there. They misappropriate your technology, open factories of their own, and then say to you, now we want to see your plan for export. That's as simply as I can say it briefly. But the fact is, this isn't about products made in America. The Chinese want American products that are made in China. And the most serious of these transfers of technology are in the airline industry, where Boeing tail sections of the Boeing 737s were mostly made in Wichita, Kansas. Now they are made in Shen province, where workers make $50 a month. And the transfer of the technology and the transfer of the jobs has taken place. General Motors, Ford, they're all fighting to get in to build factories there so they can make parts there. They want MFN so they can get those parts back into the United States. So we are exporting not low-tech jobs and textile jobs. We're exporting our technology. Now, if you take a country the size of China with the very cheap, and in some instances, slave labor, the lack of market access, the rip-off of our intellectual property, the transfer of technology, a country that is not willing to play by the rules in any respect in this trade relationship, you have a serious threat not only to our relationship, but to the industrialized world. And if there's one message that I want our colleagues to understand today and our constituents, is that on this day, your member of Congress could have drawn the line to say to the President of the United States, do something about this U.S.-China trade relationship that is a job loser for the United States. And this brings us to the point that others have said, well, we can't isolate China. Do you think for 1 minute that with 10 million jobs at least, and $35 billion and be over $40 billion this year in a trade surplus, all those billions of dollars in surplus, that the Chinese are going to walk away? Where are they going to take 35 to 40% of their exports? Who's going to buy them? This is what sustains the regime. The funding and the jobs, they can't have those people out of work. They have to be at work exporting to the United States. And so we have a situation where, again, I say, human rights, while others think they shouldn't be linked, I think they're linked because we all agree. China will be large, it will be powerful, it's in our interest that they be free. And for those who say that economic reform will lead to political reform, I reject that notion of trickle-down liberty. It hasn't worked.
Mr. Speaker, I ask this gentlelady have 2 additional minutes.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I reject that notion of trickle-down liberty. In fact, even by the Clinton administration's own country report on China, it has said that economic reform, and the quote is in my full statement, has not led to political reform because there hasn't been, the government has not allowed that to happen. And I would like to quote from a scholar, and I'll read from this. David Schaumbaugh, editor of China Quarterly, the leading academic journal on Chinese affairs, recently wrote, "Let us not deceive ourselves. China's political system remains authoritarian and repressive. In fact, it has become significantly more so in recent years. The Chinese regime is one of the worst abusers of human rights and basic freedoms. It maintains itself in power, in part through intimidation and coercion of the population. It tolerates no opposition." The third issue of concern is proliferation, the most dangerous issue of all. Both in the Bush administration and in the Clinton administration, our administrations have waived sanctions over and over for the proliferation of nuclear and missile technology to Pakistan and nuclear, missile, chemical, and biological technology to Iran, and all of the above to other rogue states. How dangerous does the transfer of technology have to be, my colleagues, to stop you from putting your seal of approval on this policy? We're not legislating here today. The President will call the shot on most favored nation status. But what we are doing is putting our name down in support of the status quo or calling out for change. As we approach our own 4th of July, I hope that members in this body will remember others who have studied the words of our founding fathers, who are inspired by them, who quote those words in Tiananmen Square and are arrested for doing so, particularly Wei Jinsheng, who is the father of the democracy movement in China, who is in jail for his second 14-year term because he has spoken out for freedom. My dear colleagues, today you will have a chance to make the world safer, the political climate freer, and the trade fairer. I urge you to vote no on MFN deterrence.
I ask that the gentlelady have one additional minute. I'd like to, and I'd like
Gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I'd like to ask the gentlelady to yield to me because she has touched on a lot of issues that are important to our colleagues: trade, jobs in this country, intellectual property. She somehow has missed a point or two that I'm concerned. And if I voted against this resolution, would I not, in effect, be supporting the thousands of children that have died in China's orphanages, where girl orphans have been selected for dying rooms, where they are tied up and left to die from neglect and starvation after they have been sexually assaulted? And if I voted against this resolution, wouldn't I really be voting to support the practice of taking prisoners and executing them and selling their organs to the highest bidder, which goes on in China today? And would I not be supporting, if I opposed this amendment, the fact that religious freedom does not exist and that harsh crackdowns of any unofficial religion, which is all religions except the state, the religious leaders are subject to physical abuse and terms? Wouldn't that be the effect of my voting against this resolution?
That would be the effect. I spent my time on the economics. I'm so pleased you brought up the last point because the National Catholic Conference of Bishops opposes MFN.
I thank the gentlelady.
Gentleman from Florida.